Hi and welcome to Maki's Closet. On today's tutorial, I'll be sharing with you a requested video of how to draft and sew a deep neckline inbuilt corset with modesty panel. So if it's your first time viewing my channel, please hit on the subscribe button, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for supporting my channel. So let's start. So first, here is my pattern paper, and I'm going to be marking out all my basic measurements from the start. So I'll go ahead to mark my shoulder to bust, which is 9 inches, shoulder to under bust, which is 12 inches, shoulder to waistline, which is 17 inches, and I'll mark 22 inches. That 22 inches is the total length of my top, which is 5 inches away from my waist. So for your inbuilt corset top, you can go ahead to use 22 to 26 inches or more, depending on where your waist stops. So if your waist is like 22, if you add 5 inches to it, you're going to be having 27. So I'll go ahead and repeat all this mark. I'll mark my shoulder to bust, shoulder to under bust, shoulder to waist, and shoulder and my top length. So why I'm doing this, that I have a lot of questions on how I mark out my basic measurements, so I'm doing it right here on the tutorial. So I'll just draw a straight line connecting all those lines. After that, I'm just going to go ahead and use my marker to mark all the necessary parts, or label all the necessary parts. So after that, we are going to start drafting, and I'm going to mark my shoulder divided by 2, and I'm going to be adding ½ inch because I'll be attaching sleeve to this dress. And I'll go ahead, come down by 1 inch, and I'm going to mark my shoulder slant or shoulder slope. So after I'm done doing that, I'm just going to take my tape and I'll mark the neck measurements. I'm going to be using 3 inches by 4 inches. So you can go ahead and use 3 inches by 3, 3 inches by 3.5 or 4, depending on whatever you want. So I don't want my neckline to be too high, so I'll be using 3 by 4 inches. So after I'm done doing this, I'll just go ahead to outline my neckline and outline my shoulder pattern. So the next step is to mark my chest line, and to get my chest line is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches. So I have 7 inches, and I'm going to draw a line at that point, so that will be serving as my chest line. So after I'm done marking that, whatever I have on my shoulder, I'm going to place it. That is 7.5. I'll make sure I mark. The reason why I'm doing this is to have a straight line at this point. So after marking this, I'm just going to go ahead and place this, fold it into 2 to get the center, and I'll go in by half. Then from that point, I'm going to draw my armhole. But before I do that, I'll be marking my bust circumference divided by 4, that is 8.3, and I'll place it to be serving as a guide for my armhole. So from that ½ inch, I'll extend it up at the shoulder line, and I'll go ahead to mark it out with my marker. So the next step I'm going to take is to mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. My nipple to nipple is 7 inches divided by 2. I have 3.5. I'm going to mark at my top length, waist length, under bust, bust, and chest line. So I'm just going to take my ruler, place, and I'm going to draw a straight line connecting from my chest line to my bust line, from my bust line to my under bust, and from my under bust to my waistline, from my waistline to my blouse or top length. So now I'm going to be marking my dart intake. So for this particular pattern, I'll be using 1 inch on both sides. So I'll mark at my blouse length, waist length. So normally you can also do a diamond dart on this part. So why I'm using a straight dart is because it's easier for a beginner to sew with a straight dart. So I'll continue with my 1 inch at both sides. So if you're a plus size, you are going to go ahead and mark 1.5 inches at both sides. So I will connect from my under bust down to my waist, and my waist down to my blouse length, and I'll repeat the same process at the other side also, and take it down to my blouse length. Now I'm going to divide my shoulder into 2, and I'll fold my tape to do that, and I'll mark the center. So after marking that, I'm just going to connect. I have at the chest line already. So after marking out, this is what I have, and you can go ahead to tighten your yoke with this, but for this pattern I'm going to make it very easy, so we are not going to be tightening our yoke. So now I'm going to place my tape, go up by 2 inches. After that, I decided to go down by 1.5 inches. So this depends on where you want your cup or to start, your corset to start. So if you want it to cover your cleavage, you can use 2 inches, 2.5 or more. So from there, you're just going to draw the neckline of your dress first. So I want to come down by 1 inch from my under bust. You can go ahead and go down by more if you really want to reveal a lot of cleavage. So from there, I'm just going to trace out what I want my yoke to look like before drawing it out. So after I'm done tracing it, I'm just going to place my French curve, and I'm just going to use it to draw it out. So while drawing the neckline, going down to the under bust part that is going to slide down to the 1 inch, I'll use a straight ruler to do that. So after this, I am done, and we'll be moving over to draw the cup at the lower part. So I'm just going to place my French curve touching my bust line, and I'll connect to the under bust. So I'll repeat it at the other part also, and I will connect. Now I'll go ahead and I will outline with my marker so that it's going to be visible for you to see. Now I'm going to make use of my French curve again, and I'll place my tape. Make sure I have like 1.25, which is the cup gauging, and with that I'm going to draw my cup, and I'm going to outline it so that it's going to be very visible. So on the upper part of this my corset, I'm going to be marking 1 inch that, and I'll go ahead to connect to my bust line. So if you're a plus size, you are going to go ahead to calculate this. I have a video on how to calculate that part for your dart intake for your corset at the upper part, and I'll just go ahead to outline what I have at this point. And after that, to draw my cup for this side, from here to here, I'm going to divide it into 2, and I'm going to mark. So after I'm done dividing it, I'm just going to connect it down to my under bust this way to draw my cup. So after I'm done drawing out with my pencil, I'll go ahead and outline with my marker this way so that it's going to be visible. So that 1 inch that I marked away from that point at the upper part, I'm just going to place my French curve. You can also use your ruler, and I'm going to connect, and I'll go ahead to outline it to make it visible. So now, before I draw my cup, I'm going to make sure I blend in the yoke part to make sure it's meeting, and I'll place my French curve, and I'll connect from that point down to my chest line to draw the cup for the other side. And this is what I have after I'm done. So next, I'm just going to connect the 2 cups together on the yoke part, and I'm done with this part. Next is to insert my body measurement. At the chest line, I'm going to mark my bust circumference divided by 4. Place this dart 2 inches dart intake, and I will place and mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. At the under bust line, I'm going to mark my under bust circumference, which is 28 divided by 4. I have 7. Measure the dart intake and replace my sewing allowance. I'll go ahead, divide my waist circumference by 4, mark it, measure my 2 inches dart intake, and mark my sewing allowance. Here I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, mark this 2 inches dart intake, which is 1 inch at both sides, and mark my 1.5 inch sewing allowance. So this 1.5 inch is not a constant. You can use more than that. You can use 2 inches, 2.5 or 3. So next, I will connect from my chest line. Whatever I have at my chest line, I will extend it to my bust line, to my under bust, to my waistline and down to the top length. So at the top length is where I have my hip circumference. So this is what I have. So if yours is not exactly like this, it is not a problem. Everybody's shape or body pattern is different. So next, I will be using my marker to mark out all my measurements so that it's going to be very visible. And after that, I'll go ahead and label my corset. So I'll mark A and curve B and this part as my yoke, C meaning center and side meaning S meaning side. So now I'm just going to go ahead and cut out my pattern. So if you find this tutorial very interesting and educative, please hit on the subscribe button if you haven't yet subscribed, and if you're a returning subscriber, thank you for supporting my channel. So after cutting this, I'll just go ahead and place my tape and I will mark 2 inches upwards. You can also go ahead and mark 2.5 inches. So from there, I'm just going to go ahead to connect it to this point and I will cut it out, and I'll go ahead to cut out the remaining part of my corset. So after I'm done cutting out my corset pattern, this is what I have. Now we'll be moving to the back pattern of the dress. Your back pattern, you're going to mark your shoulder divided by 2. You add 1/2 inch, come down by 1 inch, and you're going to draw your shoulder slope. And from that point, you're going to go ahead to mark your chest line, which is your bust circumference divided by 6 plus 1.5 inches, and I will connect drawing a straight line. Then go ahead to draw out my chest line. So after I'm done drawing that, I'll mark that as CL meaning chest line. So after that, I'll go ahead to mark my neckline and I'll be using 3 by 2 inches. And after marking the 3 by 2 inches, I'll place my French curve and I'm going to connect and draw the neckline. Then I'll go ahead to draw out my neckline. Sorry, it's not that straight, and I'll connect it down to my shoulder points. And from there, I'll divide what I have into 2. And to divide, I'll fold my tape, come in by 1/2 inch, and I'm going to draw my armhole curve. But before I do that, I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, which is 33 divided by 4. I have 8.3, and I'll use that as a guide, and I'll connect it up to my shoulder point. So I'll go ahead and use my marker to outline it so that it's going to be very visible at this point. Now I'm going to place my tape, mark my shoulder to bust line, which is 9, shoulder to under bust, which is 12, shoulder to waist, which is 17, and I'll go ahead and mark the 22 inches. So I like my back pattern to be a bit shorter, and I'm going to be cutting it out a little when I'm done. So I'll go ahead to outline that line as my as my bust line, mark out my under bust line, mark out my waistline, and then the down part of the pattern I'll be using it as my full blouse length. Next, I'll mark my nipple to nipple divided by 2. My nipple to nipple is 7 divided by 2. I have 3.5. I'll mark it at my chest line, bust line, under bust, waistline, and my full blouse length. And I'll go ahead to draw a straight line connecting all of those marks that I have made. So at the lower part, I'll go ahead and mark 1/2 inch at both sides. So I'm just going to use a very simple that pattern for the back. I'll just mark my shoulder to bust line plus 1 inch, which is shoulder to bust is 9 plus 1 inch is 10, and then I'll just go ahead and connect from that 1/2 inch as at my total blouse length to the mark I made on top after my bust line, and I'm going to connect it. So I'll go ahead and rule out the line at my chest line. I'll be using it as where my yoke will start, and I will outline the dots that I have marked also. So next, I will be marking my body circumference. I'll mark my bust circumference divided by 4, and I'll go ahead to mark my sewing allowance because there's no dart intake there. Mark my under bust circumference, and I'll go ahead to measure this little dart intake. At this point, replace it. Mark my sewing allowance, then go over to this point and I'll mark my my waist circumference, measure the dart intake, replace it, mark my sewing allowance, mark any sewing allowance of your choice. Then I will just go ahead, mark my hip circumference, measure the dart intake I have there, and I will also add my sewing allowance. So after that, I'm just going to connect from my chest line to my bust, from my bust to my underbust, from my underbust to my waistline, and from my waistline I'm going to connect it down to the hip point at the lower part of the blouse. So next, from that point, I'm going to connect all the lines and mark it out with my marker to make it more visible. So next, I'm going to go ahead, place this and mark 2 inches, and I'm going to place my French curve and I'm going to draw. So while marking this out at the back, I will just bend it a little and make sure at least the back is a bit lower than what I have in front. And after this, I'm just going to cut out, but before I cut out, I'll just label my pattern, and we'll be doing the yoke for the upper part also. And from here, I'll come down by 1.5 inches and I'll be connecting it to this line I have at the lower part. That's just like the easiest way to draw the yoke at the back. And I'll go ahead and label this as yoke. So if you notice, this pattern does not have a zipper. We are going to make use of your eyelet or your loop. So I'll just go ahead and take out 2 inches or 1.5 inches depending on what you want to work with at the back. If you don't want your back to be so open, you can use 1.5, and I'll just make a mark to show that that is the point for the loop or the eyelet. So I'll label the remaining part of my corset, and in front I'm going to be labeling this part as my modesty panel. So whatever you have here, you can just multiply it so that by the time you cut out, it will be able to cover your back if you don't want to reveal your back. So after this, I'm just going to go ahead and I will cut out this pattern. So this is what I have after I'm done cutting out. So we'll be moving over to our skirt pattern. So for my skirt pattern, this is what I have, is a fabric that is just remaining. So to measure out, I'm going to place my tape at 17 inches. That is my shoulder to waist, and I'll get the full length of my skirt, and I'm going to add 2 inches to that. So remember, where we are starting is from our waist. Your skirt pattern is starting from your waist. From there, I'll mark 7 inches for my hip. So if you're a much taller person, you can go ahead and mark 8 inches. So I'll just go ahead and make sure I have that 7 inches and check back what I have for my skirt length. So for the total length of my skirt, I'll be working with 40 inches plus 2 inches for folding or turn up allowance. So I'll mark my waist circumference divided by 4, which is 7, and I will be adding my 1.5 inch. So most times if I'm sewing a corset or a bustier gown, I don't make use of that at the lower part of my skirt. So at the hip point, I'm going to mark my hip circumference divided by 4, mark my sewing allowance. So going down to the lower part of my skirt, whatever I have on my hip, I'm going to be minusing 1.5 inches from it. So if you want it to be fitted, you can go ahead and take out 2 inches, and that is my hip circumference divided by 4. I have 10 plus 1.5 inches, I have 11.5. So 11.5 minus 1.5, I still have back 10 inches, and I'll mark it at the lower part. So I'll go ahead, connect from my waist to my hip point, from my hip point down to that 1.5 inches I minused at the lower part of my skirt. Sorry if this is not visible because the material I'm working with is very colorful. So after that, I'm just going to go ahead to cut out this pattern. So my skirt pattern is a short skirt pattern. You can go ahead and make yours long. So after that, I'll just fold my material again, and I will be placing my front pattern on it this time. So this like the easiest way to cut out your back pattern. And what I'll do is just make sure I have enough zipper allowance at the back. So for my zipper allowance, I'm using 2 inches. So after that, I'm just going to cut out my skirt pattern. So with this, I'm done with today's tutorial. So in our next video, I will be sewing this pattern, so join me. And if you haven't yet subscribed, please hit on the subscribe button. So I'll just go ahead and slit my skirt, and this is what I have.